All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Wednesday, 9/11 here on All in Horns. I'm Tanner Carlson along with Jake Jimerson. This is brought to you by Rogue Sports Network, and it is the 23-year anniversary of that horrific tragedy that struck New York City 23 years ago. Just wanted to give, a little remembrance of it. I was 7 years old. I was in my English class when my teacher stopped the class when she got the news, and she brought in a TV and we watched the news the old school way. And I just remember just kind of sitting there, not really understanding the gravity of the situation. She was crying. Teachers are trying to call parents, and parents are rushing over to the school. Then the Pentagon gets hit. No one really knows what the state of our country is at that time. And again, my oblivious young brain was just like, I mean, as insensitive as this is going to sound, it's like, cool, I get to leave school early. Like, I was 7. I didn't really understand the gravity of the situation, until, a couple days later. And so, 23 years, Jake, that doesn't seem to be possible that it happened that long ago.
Yeah, I was in history class. I remember that. And
it made history.
Yeah, it's weird. Once you get to like 15, 16, that's when you kind of started to realize what a crazy event that was.
Yeah.
And then now being 30 and having nothing like that ever happened again, you can definitely look back and remember.
Yeah, and grateful that nothing like that has hit our home soil since, and so the troops, our first responders, everybody deserves praise. They seem to get a lot of scrutiny these days, but, you still praise the good ones that do their job the right way. So don't want to talk too much about it. We've got a lot to get into today. Did want to get into Texas volleyball. Losing to Miami 3-2. This was over the weekend. Didn't get to touch on it on yesterday's episode. We know we're a little late to the party. Moved to 2-2 on the season. Jake, this is just a little bit of a hiccup. You had mentioned to me that you remember the little rough patch in last year's season before they go on to win a national championship.
Yeah, I don't have the exact but I remember they lost a couple random games that you feel like they shouldn't. And then they also had some games where they just gave up sets to teams that they typically wouldn't. And so I don't think it's anything to get overly concerned about. I've been able to watch a couple of the matches, not all of them, unfortunately. I tried to watch when the schedule allows, but their other loss was at Minnesota. We hadn't touched on that yet either. Minnesota's a really good team this year. They've taken down a couple top 5 teams. And it was on the road after a big win at Wisconsin.
I think it was the emotional kind of, hangover game.
Yeah, exactly. And so volleyball has a long season. I'm not going to get too concerned about what the state of that program is until you get, a few games into SEC play. They have plenty of time to iron things out, and we'll definitely be checking back in on the program regardless of how good or bad it's going, just to keep people up to date and check out their schedule, try to tune into their games. It's great to support all of the Longhorns sports, other than just football as well. They put in a lot of work, and it's good to try to just give them a little bit of a spotlight as well.
Well, when you have one of the best athletic programs in the entire country, it's really easy the best for 3 out of the last 4 years. And so, whenever you have such a successful program, it's really easy to just kind of tune in or keep up to date with another program. And you're like, oh yeah, they're one of the top teams in the country. Oh, golf won another tournament. That's super cool. So yeah, it's always fun to kind of keep in touch with, at least have a pulse on the state of Texas athletics as a whole, not just the football program. But this is football season. This is going to be primarily a football podcast. But yeah, we will keep you periodically up to date on all things volleyball, baseball, softball, basketball, the works, especially come basketball season. We are huge March Madness nerds. We went to we were actually at the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8 game. Not last year, the year before. God, was it really that long ago? But yeah, when Texas made their run, with Coach Rodney Terry as his interim year following the debacle with Coach Beard. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the UTSA week of Texas football. This is week 3. Texas has 11 trips into the red zone this year, Jake, 10 touchdowns. That's one hell of a percentage when you get down to what some people call the green zone.
Yeah, especially when you consider one of the opponents was Michigan, and they were now the one non-touchdown was against Michigan. However, they were still very efficient in the red zone. And I think a lot of that is just the trust in Quinn Ewers. If you look at what they're doing in the red zone, they are putting the ball in his hands. Look at that touchdown to end the first half, where he scrambles out to his left, which how difficult of a throw is that for him to throw that ball on a line to Golden? If you're not sure how difficult of a throw that is, get a football, go out into your yard, start running to your left if you're a right-handed quarterback, and try to throw it on a rope 10 to 15 yards directly into about a 6-inch square radius that you want to fit that ball into so it's not in harm's way. That was a hell of a throw by Ewers. And being able to do that and having wide receivers with the speed they do all over, being able to create separation, you have to not only prepare for the running game of Texas in the red zone, but now you have to be ready. If it's 1st and goal from the 5, Texas could go empty now, and it's effective. Normally I'm a get under center guy, but when you have the weapons this Texas team has, I love seeing Sark spread it out in the red zone, because that was a heavy point of contention during the offseason. Was the red ceiling offense was not good enough last year. They did not convert enough touchdowns. And so far, early on in the season, small sample size, one against an elite defense. It looks like they've at least started to figure that out. And like maybe the red zone could be a plus area for the Longhorns this year rather than a downside. And I think that's one of Sarkisian's greatest strengths, is being able to make a weakness from a prior year turn into a strength the following year.
And we've seen that every single season. And the 5-7 season, it was the front. It was the offensive line. It was the defensive line. Very young group of guys who a lot of them are seniors now, are now the strength of this team. That offensive line, I think, is the best in the country. And I don't know, you can make the case for Quinn being the best quarterback in the country. You can make a case for these wide receivers as being one of the better groups. I would maybe put them behind Ole Miss. But
Ohio State, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. The running back situation.
Top
yeah,
three.
Sure. Yeah. But again, I don't know if anybody has a better offensive line. Maybe Georgia. It's Georgia, Texas, and then there's a significant big gap for that number 3 spot at the offensive line as an entire position group. Jake, let's talk a little. We haven't really even mentioned UTSA. It is UTSA week. It's Wednesday, and we haven't even talked about the Roadrunners yet. They're coming off of a 49-10 loss against Texas State. Now, Texas State, those in the state of Texas probably remember they were not even an FBS team, no less a winning FBS team. They were a bottom feeder for a long time, and now they've actually put together a decent little program, whereas UTSA just a few years ago were undefeated, and possibly if this was a 12-team playoff a couple years ago, they may have had that 12 spot as the non-Power 5 conference that got that automatic bid, having that undefeated season. So UTSA not that undefeated team anymore. There's been a lot of transfers out of that team. There's been a lot of players that have actually been drafted into the league and have had somewhat decent careers at the corner for the Seattle Seahawks and their quarterback from a season ago. But now they're doing like a dual quarterback thing. I've never been sold on that. These two guys
We just talked about that last week.
Yeah, with Michigan, right? But UTSA has taken it to another level. Eddie Lee Marburger went 14 of 27. Owen McCown, which is Luke McCown's son, makes you feel old, doesn't it? 10 for 23. So almost throwing the exact same number of passes in the game, both getting over 20 throws in the game, both just barely over 100 yards. So not really a differentiator in terms of one producing more than the other. If they're going to have quarterback problems, Jake, I think you've mentioned it on the show. If a team cannot throw the ball efficiently and becomes one-dimensional against this Texas team, they really don't stand much of a chance.
Yeah, and I'd be curious. I'm not sure if was McCown benched, or because in the first game I know he played the full game and he had a pretty effective game. He was 28. Now, granted, it was against Kennesaw State, who is brand new to the FBS,
Well,
and
and
predicted.
they only won 28-16 against Kennesaw State. So I don't think it was necessarily some comfortable victory either. Now, I could be looking at just the stat sheet, and I could be missing,
Yeah,
an
we
injury
still haven't done
report.
our deep dive in, but McCown in the first game was 28-38, 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, but that's against a Kennesaw State team who I think UTSA 2 years ago probably beats by 50.
Yeah.
UTSA is coming off, and that's kind of how it works for these. I think I've seen some Jeff Traylor, the head coach for UTSA, who I'm a big fan of. He's coached at Texas before as well, so maybe a little bit biased, but
So
he had that
Owen McCown was just benched. He didn't get injured. So
okay.
he was
Okay.
just benched for poor play. So they might have a little bit of a quarterback controversy going on at UTSA
Yeah,
in San
that's
Antonio.
not what you want to have going into Texas.
Right.
And just the UTSA program, I'm a fan of. I have friends who have played at UTSA. I root for the Roadrunners. I've been to some of their games. I root for them when a Texas game's not going on, but they're just not in the same spot they were a couple years ago with the talent turn, especially with the transfer portal coming in, which really affects programs like UTSA, i.e. Trey Moore for the Texas Longhorns. They're just not in the same spot they were a couple years ago. And, a couple years ago when they played at Texas, some people were predicting the Roadrunners to go in there, not
To give them a
necessarily beat
game.
Texas, but at
Yeah.
least give them a game. And obviously that didn't happen, but
It's going to get ugly this year, I have a feeling.
I
They're not
think
in the same
Texas-
position. They're not in the same position they were when even whenever they got their butts whooped last season. So it's just kind of one of those things where as much of a fan of as I am of Coach Traylor, I've got to interview him. I've spoken with the man himself. I used to live in San Antonio. I work for WOAI, who covers their games and their broadcasts. And I've got to sit down and talk with a lot of their broadcasters over the years. Their program just isn't where it was. And I think these smaller teams go through that, and I think one thing about NIL is that's going to be a detriment to a smaller program. However, the transfer portal can turn your program around in a single season. If you get an Alabama transfer who's not getting the minutes or just hasn't lived up to the expectations of being a 4-star, 5-star, comes down to UTSA, is all of a star player. So I think it can work both ways. You can rebuild your program pretty quickly. And you can also lose some of your stud guys like a Trey Moore to some of these bigger programs, unfortunately. But it's a matter of striking while the iron's hot for these smaller programs. And this year just isn't the year for UTSA. It used to be a program like UTSA would get a good recruiting class, a solid recruiting class. And in about 4 years, you'd see them have a really good season. They'd be a 10-win, 11-win team. And then the next year, we got to rebuild again. And then by that next 3-4 years, they're back to being that 10-win, 11-win team again. And it's a little bit different now. It's not necessarily that same pattern that you used to see, just because there is so much turnaround in college football in today's landscape. But yeah, UTSA is more on a down year than they were previous years.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if that program is back to winning the 7 to 10 games here in a couple of years once they've had some time to develop. And it's all about, for these programs like UTSA, getting a solid recruiting class, developing it, accepting you're probably going to lose some, but you're probably going to be able to retain some. And UTSA does have some money that's getting poured into their school and their athletic department in the last 6 months. I believe I read a big headline about it. And so I do think a program like UTSA can compete in the future, but unfortunately for the Roadrunners, I think it's going to be a long day on Saturday. I think this Texas team is going to talk them. I think this Texas team is reaching that kind of psychopath level of thought process where it's okay. We were really good against Michigan, but we didn't give them the 60 minutes of hell that we talked about Sark talking about. So now we're going to take it out on little UTSA because we're also mad that last year Wyoming ended up being a close game. And then we have Sarkisian showing us Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois at home. We can't allow that to happen. And I think the Texas team, I'd be surprised if they came out slow against UTSA. It's going to be a night game. DTAR is going to be rocking. You're going to have the light show. There's going to be a lot of excitement around this game that I don't think there would be if it was an 11 a.m. kickoff. And I think that is going to play right into the Longhorns' hands. And I think, we'll dive more into the matchups on Friday, but I don't see this one being much better than game one.
The reason why we haven't necessarily talked too much about it is there's probably not too much that needs to be said. To be frank, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful. And you know what? Maybe there was a Notre Dame podcast with two guys talking out their ass the same way we were against, Northern Illinois. It happens. However, I don't think Notre Dame is anywhere. I think Texas would steamroll Notre Dame, to be completely honest with you. I just don't think that game would be close. And like you said, I think Texas has this kind of psychotic mentality at this point to where they're on another surface level of rabbit holes and bulletin board material.
Yeah. Go watch Untold Swamp Kings and without all the murder and stuff, hopefully that went on there. I think
where are you going with this, Jake?
Well, what have you seen it? I mean, that Florida team, if they didn't beat a bad team by like 50, they were in the weight room that evening, pissed off that they didn't win the game by 100.
It's like Urban Meyer's not necessarily,
No,
someone...
again, I'm not comparing the cultures of the teams specifically, and this was probably a terrible idea.
That psychotic mindset. I got you.
Just the mindset part of how they would be working out after a game because they were mad that they didn't win by enough.
Right.
I feel like this Texas team kind of has that DNA in them a little bit. Hopefully not the other stuff that went along with the Florida Gators.
There's a couple of other DNAs that you don't want.
Yeah, there's a fine line here, but I just think having that mentality of I want to dominate a team every week. I want that team to experience 60 minutes of hell, as Sark said. I'm gonna bang that phrase over and over because that's the next step for this Longhorn team. Is making a team suffer from the first quarter until the clock hits 0 and not letting them get a little touchdown drive at the end. They did it against Colorado State. They didn't do it against Michigan. I think they're going to be trying to repeat the Colorado State performance in the sense of never allowing them to breathe for an entire 4 quarters.
Essentially, you want 49-0, essentially, every single week. I'm sorry, OU
I'll take
fans.
52-0 as
50,
well.
Yeah, it needed to be a 50 burger. I still wasn't really sad. I was so kind of perturbed with 49, but
you should have went for 2.
That's exactly what should have happened. All right, Jake, let's go ahead. A segment that I'm really excited about. I brought this to your attention earlier this week, and we've just been trying to find a spot to put this in, and now we've got about 13 minutes left. I think this might take up the rest of that time. Would you rather, Jake? And I don't know if this is even a would you rather, but is there a coach? Is there a program? Is there a situation in the country? And you can mix and match and you can put anything you want to. You can have your little fantasy land team of coaching, resources, traditions, whatever. Is there another combination of coaches, resources, and programs out there in the country right now that you would pick over Sark and the Texas Longhorns and what Texas is currently doing right now in the college football landscape?
I mean, the obvious answer is Georgia. I think Georgia is the current powerhouse with Nick Saban leaving Alabama. It's been a few years, several years since Alabama's won a national title. Georgia's won 2 of the last 3. You could argue, Michigan fans are going to hate this, but I could argue that Georgia would have won the national championship last year if they played in that play. If it was a 12-team playoff last year, I think Georgia would have been the betting favorite to win the national title, even after losing to Alabama in a game where I thought Alabama played their A game. Georgia played about their C game, and it was close.
Yeah, and they probably would have won it as a 5 seed, 6 seed, wherever they would have put them as a 5.
Probably would have been a 6. They probably would have thrown Florida State a bone and put them at 5 for being undefeated. But
It's such
We
a
saw
bad
what
football
Georgia
team.
did to Florida State, and
Yeah.
I don't really
Yeah, that
care who
bowl
was
game
sitting now.
showed you everything you needed to know about where they should have been ranked.
But I would still take, and this is more so because of off the field things, and hopefully this doesn't come back to bite me, but I would still take Sarkisian and the way he runs the program because I think the titles are going to come. I don't know if it'll be this year. I don't know if it'll be next year. I think there's a pretty darn good chance the year after that, just looking at how the roster turn is going to turn out for the Longhorns and the recruiting class is coming in, the recruiting class they're building this year that is shaping up to be another top 3 class. But I think the titles are going to come. But I love the way that Sarkisian has built the program. I love the standard that he holds the players to on and off the field. And I think with the thing about being at Georgia is everything is football. That school only cares about football.
Yeah, their
And
basketball program's non-existent. Yeah.
the ironic thing is a lot of people think Texas football, but at the University of Texas, there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of donors you have to appease. There's a lot more that I think goes into that job than what goes into at a Georgia where you can just literally focus about football. And so I think Sark, just like Mac Brown was a perfect person, personality wise, not necessarily the X's and O's. He was more of a recruiter. Not that he didn't know the X's and O's,
Yeah.
but he was
Yeah.
more of a recruiter and a CEO. Sark kind of brings that CEO aspect, but I also obviously he brings a brilliant offensive mind as well.
Yeah,
And
I think
that's a big
I
reason why I would choose Sark over anyone. It's because he runs this offense that by anyone that has a trustworthy opinion on college football says is at minimum a top 3 offensive scheme in all of football, if not the best.
there's a reason why the Manning family wanted Arch, and Arch himself personally, not just he was influenced by his uncles or his dad or his grandpa, but there's a reason why one of the smartest people in football wanted him to play under Steve Sarkisian and get under this program and this scheme to prepare himself, not for college football. No, to prepare him for the NFL. This is the long game the Mannings are playing, and so there's a reason for that, and that's because of the system that Sark has implemented in the offensive scheme. I do want to touch a little bit. I think Mac, as great as a tactician and guy that as he was in terms of X's and O's, he was a motivator and he was a recruiter. The
He
dude
filled
was
those 2 trees up on College Football 25.
right. Now he knew X's and O's, sure he did, but the dude knew how to motivate a team and get them to play and to motivate a fan base and an entire school to believe in what he's doing. And he's done it at North Carolina. North Carolina does not have the resources anywhere close that Texas has. And yet somehow, some way, North Carolina always has a top quarterback getting picked in the NFL draft. It's like a yearly basis. And so he knows how to bring those kind of guys in, and he knows how to get them to play at their absolute best. Now, there are only 3 coaches. This is a wild stat, and it's been read until everyone's been blue in the face. But there are 3 head coaches currently in college football that have won a national title. Out of how many programs are there?
As a head coach.
As a head coach.
That is the little because obviously Steve Sarkisian's won a national title
Sure,
as an
sure.
offensive coordinator, but
Lane
as
Kiffin.
a head coach.
Yeah, right. Mac Brown, Kirby Smart, and Dabo Swinney. Out of any of those head coaches, I think Kirby Smart's the only one people would probably go 50-50 on having over Sark. I don't think anybody's taken Dabo. I don't think anyone's taken Mac over Sark right now. Now, is there a coach or a program that you believe could possibly push Texas and Georgia as maybe a little kind of a dark horse type program, or even a head coach, if you will, of winning a national championship? Because I think right now the favorites to win and kind of run college football is Sark and Kirby Smart. I'm not entirely sure if there's another coach out there. I think Brian Kelly's kind of losing his touch a little bit. I think he's losing the faith of LSU. I think the only other guys out there that are really hot names are like a Lincoln Riley, maybe Lane Kiffin. I don't know.
How about Tennessee? I
Yeah.
mean, they're recruiting at the level that's needed to win a national title. They certainly have the NIL resources. I believe on 3, they ranked the top NIL collectives. I think Texas was number 2. I'm pretty sure Tennessee was number 1. Josh Heupel is a great offensive mind. He is right up there with Sarkisian as offensive minds in football. The only reason they weren't, last year felt like Tennessee took a step down. I believe they still won 9 games, and that was with, quite frankly, an inept quarterback that couldn't throw the ball anywhere in the middle of the field. And Joe Milton, he can throw it 100 yards. You just don't know where it's going to land. And now with Nico at QB, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name without looking at it. He's looked
We
the
need
part
we need a
of
nickname like Tua. We need a Tua nickname because, and I remember in college football, I could never remember Tua Tagovailoa. I could never say his name. Now after he's been in the NFL for however long, I've come to learn it's like Ndamukong Suh. I could never remember that either. But the quarterback at Tennessee needs a nickname, and they need to figure it out fast.
Yeah, I'm just calling him Nico.
Nico.
Until then, I'm not
Tua.
rolling with the last name.
Yeah.
But he's certainly looking the part. I mean, I kind of called them blowing out NC State, and that
You
game
did.
was 51-10.
Yeah, you did. I said that NC State was going to hang in there with them. You said otherwise.
But I said that because even though it's Chattanooga, sometimes when you watch a team, and I did watch some of that Tennessee Chattanooga game because I'm a sick man that loves college football, but sometimes you can just tell when watching a team that looks different. They look like they're at a little bit of a different level than most other teams. Tennessee has that feel this year. I can already tell you they're going to go into Norman and they're going to win by 40 here in a couple
Oh,
weeks
wow.
at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
That game's going to be NC State all over again with that front against the offensive line of Oklahoma. And that's what's impressed me about Tennessee.
Byron Young.
Their offense is terrifying.
Yeah.
Their defense is scary. I
mean, they've got one of the best edge rushers in the entire country. Yeah. And
the best edge rusher, I would say. And I think they're a program that's trending in that direction that is going to be a pain in the butt for Texas to deal with in the SEC. I would say Ole Miss. I just don't think I think they're going to be more of they're going to have years here and there. And this year could be one of those years where they might be able to contend.
Is Ole Miss the Oklahoma State of the Big 12?
As of right now, yes. I think they have a chance to get better than that and actually compete at a national level, especially this season. I think this season. But I think for them, I think it's going to be more of some all-in years where they just pour all their NIL into one year, kind of like they've done this year, and really chase a title in that year. I think Ole Miss is a program that can be like that, but I don't know about on a year-to-year basis. They just don't recruit at that level. They have to hit the transfer portal hard, and hitting the transfer portal, as we're learning, is very, very expensive, especially at those premium positions.
So what I'm hearing is if Georgia is possibly the only head coach program resources that would rival kind of Texas's current situation that Texas
Ohio
finds
State,
and Ohio State's up there. I want to put together maybe like a fantasy team, and you tell me. I'm going to go ahead and take Kirby Smart coaching at Ohio State with the resources of Oregon.
Oregon would probably actually. I think Oregon was the number 1 NIL. Tennessee was 2. Texas was 3.
Yeah,
you jogged my memory, but that's a scary combination because Ohio State has
every
resource in the planet.
That's got to be. I mean, Ohio State kind of owns everything north of the Oklahoma border. I mean, who else competes with them aside from Michigan? Who else really competes with Ohio State that is north of the Tennessee state line? I mean, they've got the entire northern part of the country on lockdown. And if you give them the resources that Oregon does, which is apparently from the Nike owner, everything until he dies. And then a football mind like Kirby Smart, that's probably the only fantasy in my head where I'm like, okay, but that's just playing make believe. That's just playing what if. I still would say Sark, Texas is still a pretty damn good combination that could maybe even compete with a team like that.
Yeah, I mean, they have the resources, and most importantly, to me, what I was talking about earlier is Sark. I think Kirby Smart would get frustrated trying to deal with running the Texas program because of all the off-field stuff you have to
Mhm.
deal with, all the other sports that can take some of the spotlight away just because Texas isn't just a football only school.
I mean, Texas is a baseball school, Texas is a volleyball school. Texas is a rowing school, Texas is a swim school. Texas is a golf school. You're right. It's more than just
Softball.
football in Austin. It's not just football. Now, football is king. Football is king just about everywhere. But Georgia, it is football and only football. I haven't even heard they have Augusta in their backyard, and I've never even heard of Georgia's golf team.
I
I don't
think
even
they've
know they
had
have one.
a couple good years, but Oklahoma State, Texas, those schools are always the ones you seem to see in the national title of
Yeah.
golf. I may be misspeaking. I don't follow golf that closely, but I do think you have to factor in when you talk about this question is what it's like to run the program at Texas and what we've heard about it being, bring a Tom Herman, a Charlie Strong, they just get swallowed up by the
Yeah.
donors and all
Mhm.
the stuff you have to deal with off the field as well. Uh, I don't think there's a man I would choose in the country to lead the Texas program specifically over Sarkisian in the current college football landscape. And hopefully Sarkisian is part of this new generation of coaches that we're going to start see to develop over the next decade that start adding some national titles to their name. And that's going to be the big goal for Texas moving forward is, I think the expectation is within the next 3 to 5 years, a national title should be won at Texas. And I think that's unquestionably the expectation. I know fans may say more, but I think reasonably speaking, at least one national title in the 12-team playoff in the next 3 to 5 years is absolutely the expectation.
There is not a better time in college football to put your historic footprint on college football than it is right now as a head coach. You got Nick Saban out of the way, and you've got 3 active head coaches with the national title in the entire country. Now's the time to do it. Now's the time to take over and make your mark in the annals of college football. Is that how that saying goes? I don't know. Anyway, we're going to end it there. 32 minutes into the show, and there's no other reason why you should comment or anything else. No, like, share, subscribe. This is All in Horns. Horns every day, brought to you by Rogue Sports Media. I'm Tanner Carlson, along with Jake Jimerson. Thanks for listening, and hook 'em.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.